Ever wondered how an entire continent was organized for nearly 1,000 years? It wasn't with apps or spreadsheets, but with a system of promises, land, and loyalty. This is the story of feudalism, the backbone of medieval society, a complex web of power that defines the lives of kings, knights, and peasants alike. Imagine a world of chaos. The mighty Roman Empire had crumbled, and Europe was a patchwork of warring tribes and constant raids. People craved one thing above all: security. Out of this need for protection, feudalism was born. At the very top sat the king. In theory, he owned all the land. But in reality, he couldn't manage it all himself, so he granted large chunks of land, known as fiefs, to his most trusted nobles, the powerful lords, dukes, and earls. In exchange for this land, these nobles pledged their unwavering loyalty and, crucially, military service. This was the heart of the feudal contract. The noble became a vassal to the king. But it didn't stop there. These powerful lords would then subdivide their own land and grant it to lesser nobles, or knights. These knights, in turn, became vassals to the lords, promising to fight for them whenever called upon. This created a pyramid of power, a hierarchy of obligation cascading down from the monarch. The knight was the iconic figure of the age, clad in shining armor, a symbol of military might. Their primary role was to fight in exchange for their fief. They were expected to serve their lord in battle for a set number of days each year, Jews around 40. They also had to provide their own armor, weapons, and a horse, which were incredibly expensive. This system ensured that a king or a powerful lord could raise an army relatively quickly without having to maintain a large, costly standing army. But what about the vast majority of the population? At the bottom of this pyramid were the peasants, or serfs. They weren't slaves who could be bought and sold, but they weren't free either. Serfs were tied to the land. They worked the fields of the lord's manor, cultivating crops and raising livestock. In return for this back-breaking labor, they received a small plot of land to farm for themselves and, most importantly, the lord's protection from bandits and rival lords. Their lives were hard, dictated by the seasons and the demands of their lord. They paid taxes in the form of grain, livestock, or labor. They couldn't leave the manor or even get married without the lord's permission. It was a life of servitude, but in a violent and unpredictable world, it offered a degree of stability. This system, with the king at the apex, followed by the great lords, then the knights, and finally, the vast sea of peasants, governed medieval Europe for centuries. The manor was the economic engine of feudalism. It was a self-sufficient community, producing almost everything it needed, from food and clothing to tools and furniture. The lord's castle dominated the landscape, a stone fortress that served as the administrative center and a refuge during times of attack. It was a visible, powerful symbol of the feudal order. For a long time, this system worked. It provided military security and a stable social structure in a fragmented world. The bonds of loyalty, sworn on holy relics, were taken incredibly seriously. Betraying your lord was one of the worst crimes imaginable. This intricate web of personal allegiances held society together. However, no system lasts forever. By the late Middle Ages, the foundations of feudalism began to crack. Several powerful forces of change were at work. One of the most significant was the re-emergence of a money-based economy. The Crusades, while a military endeavor, had also reopened trade routes to the east. Towns and cities began to grow, becoming bustling centers of commerce and craft. Merchants and artisans formed a new, wealthy middle class that didn't fit neatly into the feudal structure of lords, vassals, and serfs. Kings found they could now levy taxes in cash, not just in promises of military service. With this money, they could hire professional soldiers. Mercenaries who were often more reliable and better trained than the feudal knights who served for only 40 days a year. This slowly diminished the military importance of the nobility. Then came a catastrophe of unimaginable scale, the Black Death. In the mid-14th century, this devastating plague swept across Europe, wiping out an estimated one-third of the population. This massive loss of life had a profound economic impact. Suddenly, there was a severe labor shortage. The peasants and serfs who survived found their labor was in high demand. They could now negotiate for better conditions, higher wages, or even their freedom. Many abandoned the manors to seek opportunities in the growing towns. The old system of serfdom, which tied peasants to the land, began to collapse. Simultaneously, the nature of warfare was changing. New military technologies, like the longbow and eventually gunpowder and cannons, began to render the armored knight and the stone castle obsolete. A longbowman could pierce a knight's expensive armor from a distance, and cannons could blast through castle walls. The military dominance of the noble cavalry, the very core of the feudal contract, was over. Kings with centralized armies equipped with these new weapons could now project power far more effectively than a collection of squabbling feudal lords. As the Middle Ages drew to a close, power began to consolidate. Kings, strengthened by cash, taxes, and new military technology, asserted more direct control over their realms. Built bureaucracies to manage their kingdoms, chipping away at the local authority of the feudal lords. The personal bonds of vassalage were gradually replaced by a more impersonal relationship between a sovereign king and his subjects. The age of feudalism was fading, giving way to the rise of centralized nation-states that would shape the modern world. The legacy of feudalism is complex. It was a system built on inequality and obligation, but it also provided a framework for survival and order in a chaotic era. It gave us the enduring images of castles, knights, and chivalry. But its decline paved the way for greater individual freedom, economic mobility, and the birth of modern nations, too. It's a powerful reminder that all social systems, no matter how entrenched, eventually evolve and change in the face of new ideas, technologies, and unforeseen crises. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to the Middle Ages. If you found this fascinating, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what historical topic you'd like to explore next. See you in the next video.